So contracting. So we moved away from decision making. So contracting now is the area which the standard setters don't see accounting as explicitly useful. We absolutely know it does get used. So before we get into it, what is a contract and why do they exist? So a contract is quite a wordy definition. Any legally binding agreement voluntarily entered into by two or more parties that places an obligation on each party to do or not do something for one or more other parties, and that gives each party the right to demand the performance of whatever is promised to them by the other party. Right. The way our relationships generally work is contractual. So I have a contract with UTS. That is one of the contracts in my life. I have other contracts that exist, absolutely. But UTS, from their point of view, my obligation to them is to be here, is to do this, is to do my research, is to do the various other things which is part of my employment contract. On the other side of it, they have to basically pay me my money plus whatever other benefits accrue that are included in the contract. So leave, annual leave, sick leave, all those sort of things. Obviously, I don't get bonuses, I don't get share options because obviously we're not a profit-making institution or a surplus-making institution, as much as that's different. And the reason we have contracts is because, look, the place is just too big now. I can't just shake hands with someone and say, right, you're going to sort out this job for me and believe that that's going to happen. We need contracts to provide some security that what is said is going to actually be done. And this is more graphically what this idea of the company is the nexus of contracts. So when you think about what a company is, most often people will say it's the people. That is what makes a business. That's what makes an organization. They are the assets of the business. But people leave. People turn over all the time, and the company still exists. So is it necessarily the people? Well, you could say, well, it's a building. It's like UTS as an organization, it's the tower building. And as much as we are proud of the ugliest building in Sydney, we can move from that. That could get knocked down. It could be redeveloped. Something could happen to it. So it's not necessarily the physical structures which make an organization. My relationship to you is linked through the university. We haven't gone and sorted this out in the marketplace and arranged a contract separately ourselves for me to teach you guys. This has been that I have a contract with UTS, and I imagine there's some sort of contractual relationship between you and UTS as well. That you pay UTS money for these sort of services. UTS pays me to provide services to them. So that's the relationship that we have. I mean, it's obviously, it's sort of a little bit reductionist. Obviously there are relationships, we, I suppose, do have a sort of student-teacher relationship as well, but it's, from a contractual point of view, it's linked through the university. Management. I don't have a contract with my management, with the VC and with the dean of the faculty. I don't have a relationship directly with them. I have a relationship with them through the university, with all the various suppliers, with the money that we get. These are all things that are sort of centered in on UTS as the organization. So it's this idea of a company is this nexus of contracts. Now, we know contracts do get used. Now, some background to this, and this is relevant as we go through the subject. Sometimes I can be a little bit loose with terminology, but when I talk about accounting numbers, I'm talking fairly generically there. So I'm talking about basically any number that you see in a financial statement, so as a general idea. So I'm talking accounting numbers. Net profit is an accounting number, assets are an accounting number, liabilities are an accounting number. So anything which is an accounting number I talk about is just something that you see reported in the financial statements. We then get into some underlying assumptions around why we have contracts in the first place. And there are three things to bear in mind. Now, you may disagree with these assumptions, and that's fine. Like, I definitely know I've had disagreements with people about the first one. I may be a little bit cynical, but I absolutely believe this is the case. Even people that do really awesome stuff for charity, I still think they get benefit out of doing it because it makes them feel good. Now, that's not to say what they do isn't awesome and isn't a really good thing to do, so don't get me wrong there. But I do believe people act in their own self-interest. Right at the heart of things, that is the case. Now, for what we're thinking about and how we frame that in this subject is a monetary basis. People will do things to basically make themselves as best off monetarily as they can. May be a little bit limiting that assumption, but it works for a lot of what we do. So, where this becomes important. So I'll just use me as an example because I know me fairly well. I'm a shareholder in Woolworths, which is maybe another reason why I shop there and not Coles, but I am a shareholder in Woolworths. The assumption, let's make the assumption, from your point of view, I want to make money out of my Woolworths shares. That's the reason I invested in Woolworths. Now, I bought Woolworths shares, so that makes me an owner. Now, question for you guys. Do you think if I wandered down to Woolworths head office and went, well, look, I don't really like what you're doing with the, the self-service checkouts. I don't think it's a good idea. Do you reckon they'd pay any attention to me? I don't have much. I don't have that much that I can have an impact. So let's just, as a lecturer at UTS, I'm not going to have that much. So I don't have enough. I mean, that's a fair point. Who raised? Okay, that's a fair point. And when you're looking at corporate accounting, when you're looking at ABC, that is a valid thing to say because it may be a significant influence. You may lead to control. I certainly don't have control, and I don't have significant influence. So let's just assume they wouldn't have anything to do with me. Now, what that then means is I have effectively, while I am an owner of Woolworths, they're not going to pay any attention to me. I have effectively delegated my decision-making to somebody else. So to the management and the board of directors of Woolworths, I have delegated decision-making rights about what happens with property that I own to them. They get to make decisions about how that company is run. I don't. And that's probably a good thing because I have no idea how to run a supermarket company. No idea at all. Not only that, I don't have the time, but a third reason, and there could well be more, but the third reason at least I considered with this is, what time is it now? 11:30. Okay, so we finish up at 1, so most people are probably going to go grab some lunch at that point. If we as an entire group here had to pick one place, assume we could find a place big enough to fit us all, if we had to pick one venue to go to have lunch, how easy do you think it would be to come up with a consensus in this group? It would be near impossible. I try to work out what pub to go to with mates, and there's like 4 or 5 of us, and we still have trouble doing that. Like, to do it with a group of 300 would be difficult. To do it with shareholdings in the thousands would be nigh on impossible. So it's just, there's too many people to come up with a decision that would actually work. So we have to delegate decision making because you can't have thousands of people making a decision. So firstly, we know people act in their own self-interest. So that's me, I want money, but we also know management, they want to make themselves as best off as they can. I've delegated my decision-making rights to management. And then lastly, management have more information about what's going on in that business than I do. Because they are inside the business, I am outside that business. They're not going to release a lot of the private stuff that goes on in there to me because they're just not going to do that. So what we have there is they get to make the decisions. They have access to information which I don't, and I know they want to make themselves as best off as they can, while I want to make myself as best off as I can. And what that leads to is an agency problem, because I am using an agent on my behalf, but their goals and my goals may not necessarily be in alignment. And the thing is, they've got my money. So I'm a little bit concerned that something could go on there. Okay, so there are costs of delegating decision making to someone else. Now, there is a reading from, this isn't from the textbook, and I'll talk about the textbooks after the break. This isn't from the textbook, it is from an online reading which is available. It's about 20 pages long. It is useful as a framing tool to see where this is going. But we're going to do some of this, and we're actually going to, I'm going to need a volunteer or two when we get down to the lenders section. But first of all, there are costs of delegating decision making to someone else. First up, they can just make really bad decisions. They could just make a decision which actually works out bad. Now, there's not really much else I can do about that in regards to Woolworths because I'd probably make an even worse decision. So that's not really something we control too well, apart from trying to make sure that the talent that is used by the company, and so in management, are as good as we can get. What the next two blocks are is what's called the agency cost of equity and the agency cost of debt. So what the agency cost of equity is when I'm a shareholder in a business, how can this agency problem be costly for me? How can I lose money out of it? And there are more things than just this. So that's where we refer to the chapter. But the first one is perquisite consumption. And what perquisite consumption is management going off and flying first class everywhere. Management having really awesome offices, going out to really expensive lunches all the time. If they're doing that on the company dollar, it's probably really nice for them. And you know, for sure, if I was in their place, I'd probably want to do the same thing. But it doesn't necessarily help the business perform as well as it wants to perform. I mean, yes, there's probably arguments around business versus economy sitting on planes if you're traveling a lot for business. Having just come back from Japan overnight in economy and not getting a single wink of sleep, I can absolutely understand why people would want to be in business for those flights. But you know, really fancy lunches, maybe you don't absolutely need it. And the thing is, if they're not owners in the business, they're not paying for that at all. It's out of my dollar as an owner in the business, that's where that money is coming from effectively, out of the profits of the business that can get sort of redistributed to me. So that's something I'm concerned with. Different time horizons is also an issue because I may be investing for a longer term time frame than management is actually going to be in the organisation. The average Australian CEO is only CEO for the research has shown between 4 to 6 years. So it's not necessarily a long period of time. And if you work on the basis that they're trying to make sure they maximise their returns out of the business in the time that they're there, they may be making decisions, whether they be actual decisions or accounting decisions, which differ from ours. And we'll be looking at specific cases of that as we get into the technical part of the subject. Now, this is a situation I'm going to have, and this is where I'm going to have to borrow someone for just a moment. Agency cost of debt. This is where you as a company are basically trying to rip off, like a cost, not trying to rip off, but this is a concern when you lend money to someone that they're going to lose you money. Now, the first one, and I'm going to need a volunteer for this to help with this. The first example is claim dilution. So first of all, don't have to pick someone. First of all, could I just borrow someone? You don't have to do anything too much. I just need you to come down with me, come down here for a second. One person. I'll start looking for mandatory volunteers in a second. Yep, come on down. Thank you. Just a quick round of applause for volunteering. Thank you. Beautiful. Yeah, I like that. What's your name?
You call me William.
You call you William. Yeah. Cool. So William here, do you have a car at the moment?
Yeah. Not my car, but...
Okay. Would you like your car? Would you like a car for yourself?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, cool. William's in the market for a car. Any particular car you'd like? BMW. That's really funny because the guy that we did this with yesterday wanted a BMW as well. I don't know what's going on there. So BMW, any type of BMW? Have you thought? Any type of BMW in particular, or just? You take just any. Okay. Convertible?
Yeah.
Okay, convertible. All right. Let's say he's after let's say, just for argument's sake, he's after an $80,000 car. Now, William, being a student, doesn't have $80,000. Or I'm making an assumption you don't have $80,000. Do you have $80,000? Okay, cool. That would have kind of screwed this. Let's assume you have $40,000. Okay, so you've saved up a fair bit over the last year or two, and you've got $40,000. That's not enough to get him an $80,000 car. So he needs to go out and borrow some money from him. So what's your name?
Thomas.
Thomas? All right. He first comes to Thomas here and says, look, Thomas, can I borrow $10,000?
Can I borrow $10,000?
And Thomas says,
I need information.
you need information. What sort of information do you need? He's got, because I'm making this information up, he's got a good steady job, he's got $40,000 in assets, and he's got no debt whatsoever.
Yeah, right.
And you go, sweet, that's good. Whatever, 10% rate, and you go, sweet. Now you've got $10,000. That's still not going to get you that car because you need 80. So we're going to come up, hustling for some money here. Hey, can I borrow you for a second? Sorry, what was your name? James. So you come up knocking on James's door and say, look, I need $10,000, which James does have, and he's in looking to lend some money to someone, and you say, okay, what's your debt? And you say, well, I've got $50,000 in assets and $10,000 in debt, which is 20% leverage. Still has a good job. And you go, yeah, sure, why not? That's good. And otherwise, we'd be here for... So we've got $10,000, another $10,000. We're going to come right up the back somewhere. And we're getting a bit tired of walking around. So I'm going to just borrow you for a sec. What's your name? Josh. We've got Josh here. Now, he's getting a bit tired of walking around, and he really wants to get this done with, so he's going to ask for $20,000. And Josh says, well, you should say maybe. Let's go with maybe, just for argument's sake. We do want you to say yes. He goes, $20,000, but hang on, you've got what? $60,000 in assets and $20,000 in liability. So that's about a 33% leverage. Look, you know, you're not absolutely clean on this. Maybe we'll just jump up the interest rate a bit. We'll just charge you a bit more for this. So you charge them 12%, 15%, whatever it be, and you go, sweet. Plus it's a bigger loan that you're putting in, 20%. Sweet, you've got $80,000 and you've got yourself a car. However, so thank you. And come down the front with me. Thank you, James. And where's Thomas? All right, now, this is what, okay, so what we've just done is, and this sort of thing can and does happen, he's gone and basically tapped the markets and received, it's not investment, it's sort of debt financing. Now, Josh at the very end there had the most amount of information of anyone in this whole deal. He was able to see exactly what the situation was. He knew potentially what the car was. He knew how much existing liabilities there were, and he knew how much he was putting in. And he was able to make adjustments. We did it on the fly, but we were able to make adjustments to add in the interest rate, which that can happen because William here looks a little bit riskier now. Thomas. Thomas here didn't have any of that information. All he saw was $40,000 in assets and no debt lent to him, and he saw him at 20% leverage. Now, unless, and this is where your claim has been diluted because you've lent to him, and at that point, if he goes under, you're the only person that that has to recoup money from him. Hopefully you should be able to get that. But then with another $30,000 of debt added on, you're suddenly potentially at the back of the line, or at worst, or sorry, best case, in the mix with all of them. And you may not necessarily get your money back, and his risk profile has got worse. So how do we deal with that? And one way you can deal with that is write in the contract, say, I don't want your, you probably can't tell them, I don't want you to borrow any more money ever, because that's probably too much of a limit. But what you can do is say, I don't want your debt ratio going, or your leverage ratio going above a certain percentage. So you may be comfortable with him going up to 40% leverage. Once it goes beyond 40%, then you can call in the loan, you could ask for penalty rates, you could do a whole range of things. And so that is a way that lenders can protect themselves from that issue, because he could basically take advantage of you if you haven't put that into effect. So William, you've now got yourself an $80,000 car, well done. But he does have a good job, so he's going to pay all you guys back. So thank you for being involved in that. Thank you. Okay, so that's claim dilution. And it is a serious concern. It is something that they do need to protect themselves on. Now, asset substitution, that's really easy. William, sorry, where is he again? William? All right, William went around and told each of these guys, told Thomas, Josh, and James, that he was going to buy a car. William was not telling the truth. No offense coming up here, William. William took this down to Star City and put it on the tables. That is asset substitution. If you just go, I want it for X, and just use it for Y. The reason for that, hopefully it's self-evident, is the risk of having a motor vehicle is different to the risk of going down to the tables. And that's all that it is, that people want to know what you're using the money for. So how do we deal with it? And we've actually started getting at some of the ways, and you can probably think of some of the ways that this happens. There are two main mechanisms that this goes on. There's a bonding mechanism and what's called monitoring mechanisms. Now, long time ago, starting to become, just realised I'm starting to get old. Long time ago, I used to work in KFC, local KFC. So if anyone's worked retail, if anyone's worked in a bar, if anyone's worked in fast food, basically anywhere, this may ring bells. I didn't even work at the front, I worked out the back cooking, and that was just painful. And what was even worse is I know I was young at the time, but it was like $4 an hour. It was not well paid. And it really sucked when someone came in on the night shift and someone came in late and after you cleaned everything down and had to put on another batch of stuff because then you had to clean it all down again. Now, it didn't help me because I only got paid by the hour. I didn't get paid based on the profitability of the company. So from a bonding mechanism, I actually much preferred it when it was just deadly quiet because I could just sit there doing nothing. The owner of the business obviously much prefers it being really busy because then they're getting the money from that. So there we have a goal disalignment because there's no real bond apart from the fact that I have a job to me to really want to do a lot of work there. So a way to bond just employees is to give them incentives based on how many customers come in, how many, are there bonuses for hitting sales targets, those sort of things. That's a bonding mechanism. A monitoring mechanism would be cameras over the tills. making sure that you're not basically pilfering stuff from it. It would be timesheets, making sure we know when you come in, come out. It would be the store manager watching what you're doing to make sure that you're not slacking off and nicking stuff. Not that I ever did nick stuff, but we'll leave that be. So those are monitoring mechanisms. We are much more interested in bonding mechanisms in this subject. So for equity holders, the principals want to make money. You know, so for Woolworths, I want to see share price go up and I want to see dividends. The way that that happens is the company makes money in terms of profitability. So that's what I want to see. I want to see profits. So the way I can bond management to what I want is to make them want profits as well. And to make them want profits, I can do two things. I can either directly include it in their compensation contracts. So as part of their contract, they get bonuses based on how much money Woolworths makes. And if you look at any compensation structures which are available in annual reports, you will see by and large they will have targets in there. They might not be explicit about the absolute detail of them, but they will have those targets in there. Or it might be indirectly in that I will grant them options or I'll grant them shares in the business, which makes them owners as well. And once they are owners, they have the same sort of incentive that I do. In the case of debt holders, now in this case, we're going to assume that management is acting completely on behalf of the equity holders. So let's just change William's role around here at the moment. Thanks again, William. So William isn't now, he's not looking out for money for a car. He is now managing a business and he is the CEO. We are, apart from the three guys that lent him money, we are the shareholders in his business. We are assuming in this next little bit that William is looking out for us and basically trying to rip off Thomas and Josh and James. That's kind of the underpinning idea. And the way this can work, and one way this can work is, to stop that happening, is to put in a leverage ratio like what we just talked about. So Thomas can put in a leverage ratio saying, this is the maximum I want you to go to, and if you go above that, well, you're paying me for that privilege. And that helps prevent William from ripping him off too much. And so it's one way that can be done. But ultimately, that is an accounting number, or it's based on two accounting numbers, which means suddenly there are incentives around how management wants to show these things. Stewardship. Stewardship, we don't spend a lot of time with. It came from olden days when you had lords of the manor and they had their sort of property holdings and they had, you know, their sheep and their cows and wheat and whatnot all out in the fields. They obviously didn't want to go out and count these things themselves, so they had stewards that did that job for them. They would go check on these things and report back and say, you know, at the start of the summer we had X, at the end of the summer we had Y. You know, make sure that what they have is what they have. Now, you do see a little bit of this. I mean, and it is still important, it's just something we'll focus on. When Macquarie, it's now Macquarie Group, but when Macquarie Bank in the height of the financial crisis back in about 07, 08, now the banks were getting really hard hit by it, and Macquarie, from memory, its share price peaked at about 99 something dollars. It went down fairly quickly to around the sort of $16 to $20 range. Like, it got absolutely flogged. Now, I am a shareholder in Macquarie Group, which is why I got this letter, and I certainly didn't have shares bought at 100. But there was concerns around the capitalisation of Australian banks. Now, this is a banking issue, so we're not going to talk about it too much. But all the letter basically said was, look, you've heard a lot of bad things going on. We are still in, we're still good in relation to our Tier 1 and Tier 2 capital requirements. Now, they're not exactly accounting numbers, but they're sort of loosely accounting numbers. And that was just saying this is something that banks have to maintain. As long as they're doing it, it's a threshold, they're okay. So that was just them saying, look, we are actually okay from that side of things. Ooh, okay, and at that point, we'll take a break for around 5 minutes. So I've got 11:53, so we'll come back in 5, and we'll have a look at, we've got a few guests coming in, we'll have a look at the admin of the topic, look at some of the assessments, and then we'll get into the rest of the content. Chat. All right, guys.